Welcome to the Possibility Podcast, the podcast created for families affected by disability, where we share real conversations, helpful resources, and inspiring stories from self-advocates, families, and leaders making a difference in the disability community. My name is Wayne Cordova. I'm co-founder and CEO of Possibility, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. One of the things we believe strongly at Possibility is that every person has a story, every person has gifts, every person has a voice, and sometimes the most powerful thing we could do is simply give people the opportunity to share that voice. And so today's guest is someone who has definitely found hers. I am excited to welcome Ava Sabadishin to the Possibility Podcast. Ava is a college student, a self-advocate, and someone who is actively making an impact in the disability community. Her journey has taken her from sharing her love of reading as an Instagram book influencer to discovering more about herself through receiving a diagnosis as a teenager, to stepping into leadership and advocacy opportunities across the state of Florida. She's been part of the Florida Youth Leadership Forum, presented at the Family Cafe Disabilities Conference, and involved with the Florida Independent Living Council, and will continue to use her story to encourage others. So for us personally at Possibility, we also know Ava as one of our amazing volunteers who pours into our kids and families here at Emily's Clubhouse. Today, we're going to talk about Ava's journey, finding out more about herself, finding community, finding confidence, and finding her voice as an advocate. We'll talk about her accomplishments, the challenges along the way, what advocacy means for her, and what she wants parents, young adults, and others in the disability community to understand. Before we jump in, if you'd like to support the Possibility Podcast and help us continue creating positive opportunities of support for families affected by disability, visit www.donorbox.org/possibility. Every dollar helps us continue this mission. And don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this podcast so more families can find these conversations. All right, let's take a journey with Ava. Ava, welcome so much, and thank you so much for being here on the Possibility Podcast.
Hi, Wayne. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we talk about advocacy and everything that you're doing right now, introduce yourself. Who is Ava?
Well, hi, I'm Ava. I'm 20 years old. Currently, I'm trying to pave my way as an advocate and a volunteer in multiple different disability-related organizations. I've always been deeply passionate about helping people and even animals, in all honesty, and spreading my love for literature. I'm currently working towards a degree in social work, so hopefully I can continue to help and support people in my community. I have a big passion for specifically helping advocates with disabilities. I believe that they're often forgot about in healthcare settings and even in the disability community sometimes. A lot of my experiences with disability have shaped who I am and the values, and they guide everything that I do. And I'm hoping to kind of speak on the experience of being a teenager with a disability and growing up in kind of that realm. It's not talked about a lot.
And that's for sure. And you know, one of the first ways that people got to know you online is through your love of books. So tell us about becoming an Instagram book influencer and where your love for reading came from. Do they call them bookstagrammers? What's the proper term?
Yes. Yeah. It's a bookstagrammer. I have a bookstagram account is what they call it. I started that around 15, I believe. Reading has been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember. I don't remember ever not loving reading. My mom had a big love for reading and kind of fostered that passion in me since I was really, really young. Before I could read, she would read a book to me every single day, sometimes multiple books a day. It became a routine. I didn't know anything else. And when I started the account originally, it was just something to keep me busy during COVID. It was a creative outlet. And I enjoyed taking the pictures and setting up for the pictures and writing a review, writing my favorite quotes from the books, and then just reviewing them. And it just became like a way for me to be creative.
That's awesome. It's definitely it's been neat. I have quite a few friends who that's their passion. Reading is their passion, but not just that, but just kind of but sharing it online too. And it's almost kind of like a worldwide book club. People being able to kind of go on this journey with you. As you're checking things out. And so when you look back at your childhood, what were some of your interests and passions that really kind of made you who you are?
I would say I've always had a lot of creative outlets and a lot of hobbies. Even currently, I still do. Reading, as I mentioned, was a big one. But it was kind of an escape for me. It allowed me to explore these like really in-depth, incredible, magical worlds, and in-depth stories with characters that I fell in love with. Whenever I got in trouble as a kid, I was always the kid who got their books taken away instead of their electronics. I stayed up so many late nights reading. I would be so like sleep deprived because I would just be in my room just reading late into the night. And my parents loved it too, but they were like, you have to get some sleep. Um, I've also been baking since I was young. I've always been the person to make the desserts for holidays and family get-togethers. I still do that to this day. What else? Music has also been a big part of who I am. I've played piano since I was 11, and was previously in choir and loved it. I enjoyed a couple sports. I wasn't the most active kid, but I enjoyed skiing. My family and I would take annual vacations to Colorado or North Carolina, and I would ski every single day there. I took classes. My dad and I would ski blue and black runs through the mountains. Yeah, and I knew the mountains like the back of my hand. We were up there so often. It was so freeing. Like there's nothing like being on top of a mountain. It's the most incredible feeling. Um, in addition to that, animals were a huge part of my life. I was actually previously a vet med major, and I volunteered through the Humane Society most of my high school career. I did dog sitting. I also started horseback riding when I was 14, 15 years old, just before I was disabled. I always wanted to be around animals. There was an animal at the party, I was there. It was my happy place.
Well, so and let's talk about that because your diagnosis came later on in your childhood, right? And so, can you tell us a little bit about what that journey was like, and what led to you finally receiving a diagnosis?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, I just started horseback riding, fell in love with it. My symptoms, that was not around when my symptoms started. It's just kind of when they became apparent. I was horseback riding and I realized that I couldn't push up in my right leg while I was riding. It was completely weak. At that time, I was also experiencing pain in my foot and ankle, and I ignored it for a while. Unfortunately, I just assumed like, oh, I tweaked it, sprained it, not that big of a deal. It got to the point that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started seeing doctors. I went to my children's hospital and they had told me that the arch in my foot had collapsed and I needed reconstructive surgery.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I had that surgery in when I was 16. And after I was recovering from that surgery, I started to lose my ability to use my right leg. It wasn't holding me up. It was completely weak, muscle atrophy. I also developed multiple other symptoms, issues with my heart rate and my blood pressure, nerve pain, widespread joint pain. Eventually, I was diagnosed with multiple neurological disorders. Since then, have gone through a variety of treatments, unfortunately, with minimal success.
So is there a definite name for like is there one? I mean, I know you mentioned that there's multiple, but
Yes.
is there one thing specifically that you call it when you're when you're telling people?
Usually I refer, because there's so many, so I'm not like, I always feel weird sitting down and like listing out these long, complicated names. But I have POTS, which affects my heart rate and my blood pressure. Um, and I also have a rare neuroimmune disorder known as complex regional pain syndrome. And that those are many of the treatments that I've tried, intensive PT, various procedures that I had gone through for that condition.
So is it mainly the POTS that kind of is the main culprit of all the other symptoms that you were experiencing, or do you
It
think it
is
was just a combo of
actually,
both?
yes, it was actually my CRPS that kind of started things, and then I developed the weakness in my leg as a result of that. And after I'm not sure quite when I developed POTS. That's a little bit the timing on that is a little unsure. I've
Yeah.
like been anemic, and so the doctors are like, we're not really sure when the symptoms actually lined up, whether that was your anemia or whether you developed POTS. But it just kind of came along. It was like a package deal that I didn't ask for.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, when you and I first met, when you started volunteering, at Possibility, there was still a lot of answers to be found, because this happened pretty late into, your high school life. So like what was that like receiving that diagnosis at that age? And, you're still trying to navigate high school and your future in college and, having fun and enjoying, what all that's like. What was that experience like for you?
Gosh, I guess it was incredibly difficult, and in all honesty, it was like devastating at times, and that sounds so sad to say, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but it was. You're 15 years old and you've just lost everything that you used to know, your ability to walk. It was so ingrained in your life, obviously. I believe that when I becoming disabled as a teenager, there's so many unique emotions that come with it, including grief. There was a lot of grief that came with it. You grieved the person that you were, the things that you were able to do, and even something as simple as waking up in the morning and not dealing with the debilitating symptoms that you do every day. You feel like you're mourning the life that you were previously living and even the future that you imagined for yourself. I felt that that age was supposed to be when I was building my identity and my independence and my plans, and I spent a lot of it in doctor's appointments, hospitals, and treatments trying to get better. But getting a diagnosis did bring me an answer. It brought me a treatment options, validation, and it did make everything feel incredibly real, which was actually helpful in searching for future treatment options and getting specialists that could actually treat my conditions or help me manage my conditions. It's, but I want to mention that grief and disability, it's not just a one-time thing. It comes in waves. So there are days that are easier, there are days that are harder. But my disability has taught me to be adaptable. Like it's taught me strength, and it's allowed me to find out who I am, but it's also allowed me to discover my community, which has been a big part of who I am and who I'm hoping to be.
It's kind of interesting too because for a lot of folks that I talk to when it comes to even doing what we do at Possibility, they think in terms of disability as something that you're born with, right? They think that disability is something that starts at birth. And one of the things I talk about all the time is that, disability can come at any time and at any given moment, whether it is through something medical that happens later, whether it's an accident, whether it is a delayed diagnosis or delayed symptoms, that can happen. It could even be old age, and it's like that umbrella of disability can really happen at any moment, and where and when it happens really does kind of affect the grief that you experience, because when something is changed or taken away from you, then it's a whole lot fresher. Was it tough in high school when it came to like relating to your friends and them relating to your diagnosis? Was that a struggle for you, or did you have friends that magically understood what you were going through?
Unfortunately, not. I obviously it was an adjustment for my friends who were there. I did also lose friends over it, unfortunately. School was a struggle. My high school was not the most accessible in terms of accommodating complex health needs. So there was a lot of advocating and fighting there. I also dealt with like some challenging social situations. Some students don't quite understand disability. Some would say like there was some bullying going on. I think it was just more a misunderstanding between kids who simply didn't know what it was like. And so sometimes there were some comments made, or, they made fun of the way that I walked, or would call me a slur. Um, so it was high school. Uh, Eventually, I actually wasn't able to stay in school because of the way that things were set up. So I ended up going online so I could do my classes from home, while also being in the hospital and going to the appointments. I was just missing too many days to be able to keep going in school.
Well, and that's also something that kind of comes with disability sometimes, right? Is the a lot of missed time, because everybody else is part of a club or a sport or something, and your club or sport is therapies and doctor's appointments, and having to
Exactly.
experience that. We know what you're talking about. My daughter Emily, we've talked about it before. She's entering into high school, and even just finding a high school that's accessible to her.
Yes.
Yes, she has the right to attend, but a lot of schools haven't really caught up in the way of accessibility, and accessibility benefits everyone. Doesn't just benefit folks that are disabled, but just even finding that. And I'm curious. So, like when you and I first met, you started volunteering at Possibility. You were using crutches, right? To
Yes.
kind of get around. And at that point, I think it was probably a little bit more for stability's sake, than anything. How did you get around in high school, and what about now? Just kind of talking about accessibility for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. In high school, my conditions were, it was a little bit more early on. They're not progressive. They've kind of plateaued where they are now. But I was at one point progressively getting worse to the point where I am now, has plateaued, luckily. But in high school, I didn't have a wheelchair yet. So I was strictly on form. Actually, I was using a cane for a short period of time, cane and braces. Then I had to switch to something more stabilizing. That's when I switched to the crutches. Eventually, I believe it was my senior year. That was when I got my first wheelchair. Now I use crutches short term for short distances, and then anything longer than that, I use my wheelchair.
And how big of an adjustment was that? Kind of making the progress and the switch to that. Is there a bit of relief that comes with okay, well I'm going to use my wheelchair for these, or is there another moment of grief where you're kind of going, I used to get around this way and now I'm getting around, in this way?
It was a mix of both for sure. There were days where I didn't want to use my wheelchair or even didn't want to use my crutches. And, it would lead to dangerous situations of me falling or not being able to get up and requiring help from other people. And I think that was at many points there was moments where I was like, you need to use these things. They're helpful to you. You can't
Yeah.
get around without them. But it is really challenging to be able to kind of change the way that you think about yourself. And sometimes even doctors aren't the most helpful in encouraging mobility aids or discouraging them in some points.
Hence the self advocacy part of things, right? And it's becomes that you. So you talked about like high school, kind of there's mourning this phase of life where you're supposed to be kind of finding out who you are and all of that. Does having a disability and having receiving those diagnoses, did that begin to change the way that you understood yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Before I was disabled, that girl, when I look back on her, she seems like an entirely different person. I recognize her, I know her as myself, but she seems completely different. Before I was still diagnosed, I still viewed myself as that girl. And the truth was I dealt with so many things. I was changing. I was going to be different. And that was natural. I had to kind of confront my reality of being disabled and rethink who that made me as a person, including it within myself, not excluding it, because it is a big part of who I am. And it's a big part of how I see the world and now the values that I carry. It's allowed me to understand the importance of accessibility, inclusion, resilience, adaptability. Like it's changed my values and views so much.
And it's interesting because like sometimes people think that a diagnosis creates limits, um, and having a disability is a lot of stops, along the way. But it also begins to create some understanding. And how did building on that understanding, how did that help you advocate for the things you needed? Because I know you were mentioning it's like, school wasn't accessible. Sometimes the doctors say no, and, and they're not, being helpful. And, they're probably trying in their own way, but ultimately, even when it comes to your parents and stuff, it's like you are the best advocate, for yourself. So how did that help you kind of become that advocate?
So I would say the biggest difference for me was before a diagnosis and then getting a diagnosis. Once I received a diagnosis, I was able to seek treatment and specialists that were specified for my condition. They understood it, and before I before when I didn't have a diagnosis, they didn't know what to treat. Once I received it, it opened a lot of doors for treatment and other opportunities for managing my symptoms long term.
When you start kind of asking for those, like, so now it's like, here you are, you're learning more about yourself, you're asking for these treatments, or these, trying to seek out the best way to get the help that you need, and all that really kind of, that begins to kind of fall in line with you becoming a self advocate, like speaking up for yourself, whether you're speaking up for yourself at school, at home, like, in your own town, or as you're getting ready for college. When did you realize that for you and yourself, that you're like, okay, this is who I am. I'm a self advocate, and that's a term that best describes me right now.
I think I heard the term self advocate, but I don't believe I really knew what it meant for a long time. I first heard it when I was really deep in my procedures and my treatments. I had a really challenging doctor who made me feel like I wasn't heard. When treatments weren't working, the blame often fell back on me somehow. And I remember my mom telling me one day after a really tough appointment that I needed to learn to speak up and advocate for myself. And at that point, I thought that I was just supposed to listen to the doctor and follow his instructions, no matter what I thought. I didn't think that I was going to be able to work up the courage to speak for myself. Eventually, over time, I started testing it, figuring out where what I was comfortable saying, and over time that kind of increased. I realized that self-advocacy for me was learning to trust myself enough to ensure that my voice was heard, asking many difficult questions, and speaking up if I felt like something was wrong in any scenario, including healthcare.
Well, I've seen that definitely grow and change in you, especially when it came to like your participation in a bigger world of advocacy and self advocacy. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you're involved in. And if I miss it or get something wrong, let me know. But you've been a participant in the Florida Youth Leadership Forum. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what you learned from that.
Yes, absolutely. The Florida Youth Leadership Forum is a leadership program that runs annually. It is a program that takes participants who are students with disabilities. We have a wide variety of disabilities who participate, and they work to improve their independent living skills. They get to stay at the dorms at FSU. They work on their leadership skills and their self-advocacy skills.
And so that's it's kind of like just diving right into like living independent, being able to just kind of again speak up for yourself, say that speak up for what your needs are, but then kind of deep diving into youth leadership, right? And just kind of like going into that. What was that experience like? Were there like multiple sessions? Is it like a big camp feel, or is it more of like a crash course on leadership at your age and dealing with your diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I was a delegate in 2023, which is your first year with the Youth Leadership Forum. this program changed my life. It was kind of my first introduction into the disability community. And there was, I have been back every year since as a volunteer. So after you have your delegate year, you can come back as a volunteer to help mentor the next group of students with disabilities. During my delegate year was not only my introduction with the disability community itself, but I also met Sarah Goldman, who I believe you guys have had on the podcast.
Yes, we have.
Yes, she has been a huge inspiration of mine. Her impact is a huge reason why I'm going into social work. She's helped create a space where, myself included, so many individuals with disabilities can feel comfortable in that community and be empowered to self-advocate for themselves. Seeing her work has kind of showed me the impact that one person can have, and I hope that, and I realize and hope that that's the impact that I can have on other people as well, hopefully.
Well, I'm going to put the link to Sarah's interview in these show notes here. So if you scroll over as you're listening to this, you'll be able to hop over to the next episode, the previous episodes where I've had Sarah on. But let's talk about that, because you being able to expand that reach. You've also recently presented at the Family Cafe, which is a huge family conference for families affected by disability, and I mean, this is a huge statewide event, and it's a completely different kind of platform for you to be able to speak from. So what was that experience like, and what did you talk about there?
Family Cafe itself was so fun. This is my first time going. I had never seen so many wheelchair users in one place. It was crazy. They were everywhere. I'd never experienced anything like that. It was wonderful. It was a place where disability was so visible and normalized. I didn't get any stares or random comments from strangers like I usually do in public, because it's normal to be disabled there. I was able to give my presentation alongside other YLF alumni on self-advocacy. I also spoke about learning to advocate for myself and my experience with Florida YLF and how that's kind of shaped my leadership.
So a lot of people would be nervous about speaking in front of other people about that. How did you feel being a presenter, and what gave you the desire and the courage to step up and share your story?
In complete honesty, I just did it nervous. If I let being nervous stop me, I would have missed out on so many opportunities, not only for myself, but also to help connect with other people too. Even now, when I'm doing these events and presentations, I still get nervous, and I still have to do it nervous. But for me, if my story can help someone feel less alone, or even feel more confident in advocating for themselves and using their own voice, then that is worth it for me.
No, and honestly, you do a great job of it, and it's really great to be able to see that grow and expand. You've also been involved with like Florida Independent Living Council, and on that, what kind of work have you been able to do through that?
I have been on the Philk Youth Committee since 2023. This opportunity was different from anything I had kind of done before. It allowed me to be involved in disability advocacy on a larger statewide level, which was interesting. It was something I hadn't done before. It was more on a smaller, more personal level. A big part of the work on the committee was to ensure that youth voices and concerns are being represented in the State Plan for Independent Living, which, if you don't know, the State Plan for Independent Living is a plan that outlines priorities, goals, and funding for independent living services for people with disabilities. A lot of the work included collecting data, stories, and experiences from youth directly so that we can understand the challenges that young people with disabilities are facing and hopefully help provide the support that they need.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, honestly, it's a pretty interesting thing, and I think maybe only individuals and families like ours really kind of understand, where it's like you have this teeter-totter back and forth of advocating for yourself or advocating for your child, and then also at the same time advocating for everybody else. And you're navigating your own experience as a human, where it's like you're not Superwoman, right? It's like you have your ups and downs, you experience grief just like everybody else, but then also the opportunities to step up and to speak for others, and also to to advocate for some serious changes. We heard you talk about independent living, but what are some of the other changes that you hope to see for people with disabilities?
When it comes to advocacy, I hope to see a shift in the way society views disability. And I know that's such a broad and big thing to tackle, but I would love for disability to be viewed as a natural part of human diversity. I don't want people or society to look at disabled people with pity, fear, or just misunderstanding us as individuals. There are so many times in my experience where I've had people look at me with pity, and that's the worst feeling ever. I hate that feeling. I've learned that there's a huge difference between pity and empathy, and oftentimes people look at disabled people with pity rather than having an empathetic view on the things that they've experienced, or the inaccessibility that they've had to deal with. The world's not built with disabled people in mind, both in the infrastructure and the way that our society functions. I would love to see a world with greater accessibility, not just physically, but also socially and educationally, and hopefully within healthcare as well.
Love that, and you've got the platform here anytime you want it. So, anytime you want to, talk about and share, more about these things, it's great. And we say it all the time. It's like accessibility. It helps everybody. It really, truly does. And like you said, whether it's on a physical level and being able to have access, to a doorway, or through a path, that's one thing. But also just to be able to have access to everything that everyone else has. It's just that thing where inclusion isn't just about letting individuals with disabilities participate. Inclusion's everybody participating.
Absolutely.
And so that's the cool thing. So you volunteer with us here at Possibility. It makes my day every time you're able to, and that you're here. We love having you here. What made you want to volunteer here at Possibility and to serve other families?
A lot of my past experiences have been different than the population that you guys serve at Possibility. I have worked with teenagers and young adults with disabilities, especially in the advocacy space. I didn't have any experience or even understanding of disability from the perspective of a parent, or even the perspective of a younger child who's also trying to find their place in the world.
And what has working with younger kids with disabilities, taught you in this experience?
Working with younger children has shown me that they're also searching for a place where they can belong and can be themselves. Being around those kids has shown me how important it is to create spaces where they feel safe and accepted for who they are. Working with them has allowed me to even reflect on my own journey and seeing the impact that community and belonging can have, for sure.
And and honestly, it's like I've seen you in action here, and it's one of those things where whether it's been through special events or through our our after school program, where most of the kids are primarily younger kids, running around full of energy and and ready to go. It's been what I think has been really neat, and this has been my perspective as an observer, right? Is that our kids don't see the differences between each other or between the adults that are serving with them. And I think that's the cool thing, is that this is something that for some reason, somewhere in society along the way, we get taught to see differences. We get taught to, say this person's different. They're getting around differently. They can't do certain things and that kind of thing. And, to see the kids just be able to just participate with each other, not knowing what the other person's diagnosis is, not knowing what the other person's limitations are, and they're just kids, has been so great. And obviously, you do a great job with them, but it's always just been kind of cool, just to see the fact that even though you have graduated and gone off to college, you keep coming back, and that's always been the cool thing.
Absolutely. You guys hold a special place in my heart. When I was volunteering the other day, there was a little boy who asked me why I use those, and he pointed to my crutches. And I chuckled a little bit, and I told him, I'm like, oh, it's because my leg doesn't work very well. And he goes, oh, okay, cool. Mine do. And I said, I'm so glad they do. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen with the difference of working with kids and then seeing my having interactions with adults in public is with kids, it's pure curiosity. And
Yeah.
when you tell them like why I use them or why I use a wheelchair, they're like, okay, cool. And they just accept it. And that's such an incredible and beautiful feeling.
When Emily uses her speech device, to
Hmm.
talk, it always, sparks really interesting questions, and the opportunity to have those interactions, and they walk away learning something. They walk away, just with a deeper understanding than probably even their parents have, of what disability is. What would you say to a teenager who feels different? They're struggling to accept their disability or their diagnosis, and they're in that same spot that you were in a few years ago.
Whew. I would say that it's not easy. You're dealing with an incredibly hard and really unfair thing that you shouldn't even have to deal with in the first place. I would recommend that you lean on your community. That was my biggest savior when I was struggling. Whoever that may be, it doesn't have to be in the disability community. You should find people that make you feel like you truly belong and who accept you completely. It's okay that you don't accept your disability or your diagnosis yet. Acceptance isn't going to come right away. For me, it took time, and even today, I still struggle. Over time, when I was around people who understood me and my experiences, it helped me feel supported. You deserve to feel that support and that understanding, and you deserve to be in a place that with people who accept you as you are.
That's really awesome. And so, what would you get? So, what advice would you give to parents? Because I know your family is super close. I know that your parents have been great supports to you, and so we can't let you leave here today without giving them a shout out, because I know they're incredible people and they've done such a great job of just standing with you through all this. But what advice would you give to other parents who are raising a child with a disability, especially when it's a situation where the disability or the diagnosis comes later on in their life, like what you've experienced? What would you say to those parents as they kind of help their child become more independent?
I would say, and hopefully remind parents that independence is going to look different for every child. It might not look like doing everything alone. It can be simply building confidence and skills and trust in themselves to make their own decisions. That was kind of the biggest thing for me. I'm now in college and I have to make my own health decisions and figure out how to make my way in this world as an adult. And my mom has kind of built me up to allow me to get to that point. And even some days I call her and I'd be like, I'm like, I need help. Please give me some advice. And it's okay to do that, but to make them feel comfortable enough that they can do that is a really important thing. I believe it's also important for children to try things. I've seen so many cases where kids are trying things and the parents want to step in and make things easier. And that's not going to help them in the long run. It's going to look different the way that they do things. It's going to look different. It might take longer than what you expect, but you have to give them space to try and maybe struggle a little bit, but they probably will, and hopefully adapt and then learn from that. For me, I believe that support was a big important part of me becoming more independent. My parents often celebrated the small wins and were simply present when I was trying to figure things out, and that was enough for me. It also meant that they advocated alongside me if I needed help, if I didn't have the words or confidence to do so yet, and that was also super big in my journey.
That's so awesome. So we're wrapping up, and just let's look back at younger Ava. What would you tell her, knowing everything that you know now?
Yes. I would tell her that she's going to be okay. I would remind her that even though things get really hard, she managed to grow in ways that I didn't expect, she wouldn't have expected. I would remind her that she doesn't have to have everything figured out because at that age, I thought I had everything figured out. My entire life was planned out. And little did I know I didn't. I would remind her that it's going to turn out okay. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel angry. I would remind her that she finds new passions and friendships who the friendships actually end up being more like family. And she would discover parts of herself that she never would have expected. And she's also proud of those parts too.
I would say that she's going to be more than okay. I think that she's pretty
Yes.
awesome. So,
Yes, she's going to thrive.
absolutely. So, as we wrap up, what's next? What's next for you? What are your dreams, your goals? What do you want to accomplish in the future?
Currently, I am finishing my Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology with a minor in medical sociology, so hopefully graduating. I have plans to apply to my Master's of Social Work program this year. My long-term goal is to either be a pediatric medical social worker or work for a nonprofit that supports people with disabilities, maybe even teenagers and young adults with disabilities. I would
Possibility?
like, yes, possibility. I will always be involved with you guys. You guys know that. I will always be here. Um, I'm hoping to be in a role where I can help people during maybe some challenging times in their life and hopefully help them feel less alone in it, whether that's a hospital setting or a community organization. I want to ensure that my work centers around connection and support and empowerment of both disabled youth and their families.
I think that's incredible. And listen, we can say that you have come a very long way, but the truest thing is that all of this has been leading up to where you are now, and so all of your experiences growing up, the way that the way that your parents raised you, the way that they supported you, all the experiences that you've been through, one thing after the other have made you to be the person that you are today. And and the future is super bright for Ava. And I am so excited. You are welcome to come back anytime
Oh,
on the podcast. And I just want to say, Ava Sabadishin, thank you so much for being here today.
thank you so much for having me.
So one last time, I want to say, Ava, thanks so much for joining us today, for sharing your story. One of the things I love about conversations like this is the reminder that advocacy doesn't always start with changing the whole world. Sometimes it starts with understanding yourself, leaning on your strengths, finding your voice, and realizing that your story can help someone else. And for our families listening, especially parents of children and teens with disabilities, I hope Ava's story encourages you. The goal is not for our kids to become someone else. The goal is to help them discover who they already are, what they're passionate about, and give them the tools, opportunities, and support to chase those dreams. If today's episode encouraged you, please help us reach more families. Subscribe to the Possibility Podcast, leave us a review, share this episode with someone who needs to hear Ava's story, and if you'd like to support Possibility and help us continue providing positive opportunities of support for families affected by disability, visit www.donorbox.org/possibility. For more information about our programs, events, and resources, check out www.possibility.life. I want to say once again, thanks for listening. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we'll see you next time on the Possibility Podcast.